Irene Roderick is an artist and a teacher specializing in improvisational quilting. She has been an artist her whole life, since her parents gave her her first set of oil paints in the third grade. She has been painting and crafting for over 50 years, mostly from her home while raising four sons and working. At the age of 46, she returned to school and earned a Bachelor's of Fine Arts at the University of Texas and a Master's of Fine Arts from the California Institute of the Arts. She began quilting in 2015 and fell in love with it and gave up painting altogether. She's retired and working about 10 hours a day in her studio playing with fabric. She is an award-winning quilter with quilts juried into Quilt National in 2019, the 2018 Quilt Fest in Austin, Texas, winning a blue ribbon, the 2018 Best of QuiltCon traveling exhibit, QuiltCon, and many others. She has also had paintings exhibited at many museums and galleries, including the Dallas Museum of Art and the Austin Contemporary Museum. Her focus is on organic and intuitive improvisational quilting. She says that after 50 years of art practice, she has finally found her creative voice. All right, hello, Irene. How are you doing?
Hi, Shannon. I'm doing great.
I'm so glad to be talking to you today.
This is really exciting, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you are, I've seen your work for a while. I remember you were in my class years ago is where we first met.
Right.
Over at a local fabric shop. And I remember then recently we kind of touched base again because you were exhibiting at another local fabric shop.
Right.
Here, and I, even before I saw you come in, I was just, taken aback by the gorgeous quilts that were hung up everywhere and really taken by how distinctive your aesthetic is. It's very you, like it's very distinctive and unique, and I hadn't really seen anything exactly like that. So I was really excited to then have you on. And so why don't we start by telling us how you started quilting?
Sure. Basically, about 3 years ago, I moved into a tiny house. So it's one room, right? So it's like a studio apartment. And I love color, and I couldn't find anything to put on the bed that, was distinctive, that was fun, that I really wanted to be part of my environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I went online, and I looked around at quilts to see if I could order one. And, of course, then I run into Nancy Crow, Denise Schmidt, Gwen Marston's quilts, and I'm looking at these online, and I am falling in love. And all of my life, we've never had any money, so if I ever wanted something, I had to make it. So I immediately look at these and go, well, I can make that. And so I started delving into how to quilt and how to make these quilts. And then the other side of this is that I'm also trained as a painter. And I've been out of graduate school for about 10 years because I went to school when I was really old. And all my paintings had turned to white on white. And so I was really looking for a way to bring color back. And I was really burned out on painting. And it dawned on me that my paintings and quilts are about the same scale, except one's useful and one you can't do anything with because there's nobody that has walls big enough to put them on. And so, and anytime I start a new kind of craft or project or art, I just jump in with both feet. And that's what I did. I don't think I ever made a quilt for that bed.
Oh, yeah?
I think I ended up with just a white blanket on it forever with a lot of pillows. But because I was just so taken with the whole process. And so I would just make quilt after quilt and try pillow after pillow and get books. And that's pretty much how I started. Yeah. And it hasn't been that long, but I work a lot.
Yeah. You produce a lot. You have a lot of work. So did you start with improv from the beginning, or did you
No.
patterns? How did you start out with that?
Improv it was kind of accidental.
Really?
So when I first started quilting, I was looking at people's paintings. I was looking at other people's quilts, and I was trying to, and I remember saying at my quilt guild one day, we were, I was new to the guild, and we were supposed to say something we were going to work on that year, and my statement was, I'm going to learn how to understand quilting. And they all looked at me like I was crazy. But it was kind of true. I didn't quite understand the process. I didn't understand how it worked, and I was really fascinated by it. So I spent a lot of time. I didn't copy many patterns. I've made some Freelanders, and I was doing the kaleidoscope paper piecing with a lot of fussy cutting and things, and that was fun. But so basically, I was making paintings and looking at modern quilts and trying to figure out what a modern quilt was. Mm-hmm. So improv wasn't part of it then, and I don't even think I knew that it existed. Mm-hmm. But what happened is last year, some friends and I were driving around and talking about painters we liked, and one of them said, well, I just love Hundertwasser. And I'm going, I went to graduate school in art. I've never heard of this person, had no idea who it was. So she brought a book over, and they are the most amazing, strange, colorful, pattern-filled paintings and prints. And I looked at those, and, true to self, I went, I want one of those.
Yeah.
So I just started one day, and I started looking at the components that he used in his paintings. Then I started duplicating them and putting them on the wall, and then starting arranging them. And the next thing I know, I'm going, this is amazing. This is the most fun I've had in years. Yeah. And it kind of just grew out of that day.
I love that. That's so neat. And it's really neat that your original inspiration was from this other love of yours, painting. And I think that helps when we have these different influences that are not only in the quilt world. I think that helps to, our work ends up looking really unique, really, really distinctive.
Yeah, and I think that's because, I think my work does look more painterly than it does look quilterly. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes from my background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So neat. So, like I mentioned before, I was really struck by your distinctive aesthetic, and we've talked about, you've mentioned now how that kind of came from your love of painting and from this particular painter. Can you kind of tell us about the evolution of your aesthetic, kind of how it became, what it currently is?
Well, by surprise, pretty much.
Yeah.
So after I made a couple of quilts based on the Hundertwasser, which means 100 waters or something in German. Anyway, so I made a couple of quilts kind of based on his colors and his shapes, and kind of just combining them in different ways. And then this is what I've always kind of done with all of my work, is I just put it all away. And I don't look at anything anymore. And I put away Nancy Crow's book, and I put away my Hundertwasser book, and I put away, Denise Schmitz and Marie Schell, who I also love. And I kind of have stored all of that information in my head, but I put it all out of sight. I can't see it. And what I did was just walk in one day and put a piece of fabric in the middle of the wall and said, what are you going to do with that? And so I just started responding to that piece of fabric and that shape with other pieces and other shapes. And this is my whole process. I start in the middle with one piece of fabric. I choose a palette usually, because I'm usually in love with a certain color at a certain time. And then I just start responding to that. And so the quilt grows.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very painterly way to work too. It's very additive. And so, and it's in a process where it's a constant engagement with what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Because everything I put on the wall, I have to respond to in a particular way.
Yeah.
And there's choices. I have to make those choices as I go. And does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love the idea of just starting with a piece of fabric on the wall and then just kind of playing with that. Don't you call one of your workshops dancing with your design wall?
Yes, it's my new 2-day workshop, and it's called Dancing with the Wall, Improv Irene style.
Uh-huh.
And so I consider my process dancing. And, I've taught drawing and painting, and I do the same thing. I don't let anybody really sit down because I make everybody work large, at least human size.
Okay.
Well, first of all, it's easier, especially for piecing.
Sure.
And you can see what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, you're putting something on a wall and you're responding to it. You're stepping back. You're making components. And so it's a dance between the design wall, between the piecing, the sewing machine, between a lot of ironing and cutting. And it's kind of this 4-way, and you've got to step back at least 6 feet.
Okay.
Pretty much most of the time, so you can really see what you're working on, because you can't see what you're working on when you're, an arm's length away. You can only see a little section.
Mm-hmm.
So to get the overall, you really have to step back. And it's been a lot of fun, and the students really respond to it well.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen on social media some of their you posted some of their projects that they've worked on, and that's just really neat to see. So I'm sure they just love that. So for some of our viewers, I think might be thinking to themselves, that sounds amazing. That sounds just really that sounds like an amazing process, but how do I do that? How do you know when you have a piece of fabric on the board? How do I respond to that? How do I know what to do? Do you have certain questions that you're asking yourself? Do you have certain like little tricks, like, okay, maybe I'm going to do a slice and insert here or something like that? Like how do you know how to respond, or is it just completely intuitive?
For me, it's mostly intuitive. But when I put together the class, what I decided to do was the first day, we make components. And I talk a lot about different types of components, stripes and railroad tracks and curves and slice and insert and log cabins and triangles. And so we talk about all of these kind of tools. Yeah. That you have at your disposal to build these quilts. And so basically we start with a very limited palette of 5 colors, and a black and a white, or a dark and a light, neutrals. Mm-hmm. Because you really need to narrow your colors, or you can turn into a real kind of muddy mess your first time around. And I tend these days use 2 colors or 3 mostly, because it's more of a challenge for me. Yeah. But so we limit our palettes. And we talk about them, and then we learn to build these different components. And at first, it was just like, well, keep your components, and then the second day we'll go and we'll start putting them on the wall. But I realized that once you start making components, you start putting them on the wall. Yeah. And it's funny how they start making these amazing patterns and these relationships between them. And so it's not just intuitive at that part. You're experimenting, you're trying, you're putting something up. Mm-hmm. See if it works. And one of the tricks I have, because, I always get to that point in a quilt where it's just like, this is not working. This is horrible. I hate this. I don't know what to do. I mean, every single quilt has that moment. Yeah. And it's not the first few steps. It's like when you're about a third of the way through. Yeah. Yeah. Totally. And you're going, I don't know what to do next. This is crazy.
A total hot mess. I just
it's a mess. And so a lot of times I will just go over to a piece of scrap, and I will take it and I will throw it on the wall. Okay. And it's amazing how that one motion will open things up, because the trick to improv is to not have any preconceptions, is to let it flow, just let it come out of you. And of course, that's really, really hard to do. And I think about a third of the way into the quilt is when we start, those preconceptions really start creeping in and going, but I wanted to do what that last quilt did, or I wanted to do what this one did.
Yeah.
And I really have to take something and just throw it up there,
Okay.
break that pattern, and step back and go, okay, what does that do? And it's amazing how many times that just opens it all up. And I call that kind of the eureka moment. You just go, oh, there was one quilt that you probably saw out there, and there's this big yellow stripe off to the side, and everything else is kind of blue and white indigo. And that stripe was one of those. I just put it on the wall because I went, yellow. It needs yellow. You know, and it's those kind of surprises and accidents that open up a piece.
Yeah.
But that's how I have students do it, is to start with, you know, really these tools. And because you can see it as they work. They start seeing these relationships, and they start seeing these patterns, and all of this fear and all this confusion just kind of drops off. And they get really excited. They're going, oh, look what this did. Oh, and I can put this here. And oh, look what this does. And it's amazing that the process is not hard, but you got to let it happen.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, that's the hard part for all of us, is just let it go, relax. And you have to keep, I saw the movie McQueen yesterday.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah, well, I think it's gone now, but it was about Alexander McQueen. And I mean, there's, to watch his lack of fear and creativity was amazing. And that's what you really have to have, is just, nobody's watching you, you know, nobody's looking over your shoulder. You're pretty much in your studio by yourself, probably.
Yeah.
So what's the worst that can happen? You don't like it yourself, you take it down.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times I'll put something on the wall in one place, and I'll think to myself, it's not working there, but where would the least place that I would put that? And that's where I put it, and I go, yeah, it fits there. It's really a fun, constantly engaging process.
Yeah. So were you just fearless with quilting from the beginning, or did that kind of come from your painting background? I'm sure you have to be really fearless when you're doing that as well.
Now, it's come in the last 6 months, the last year.
Really?
It's come since I started doing improv. Because painting was always too serious. And when you go to grad school and they say, you need to play, and I go, I don't know how to play, you know. I looked up play in the dictionary, and I was going, I don't really know how to do that.
Yeah.
And it was always, it needed to mean something. It needed to say something. It was all steeped in, you know, some kind of mythology that, you know, that I really wasn't, I was invested in, but not totally. And so I had a really hard time trying to figure out what I was doing and what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
It was not until I started doing improv and letting it all go and letting it come out just naturally that I felt this major creative breakthrough.
Really?
And it was major. I mean, I'm 68 years old, and I've been trying for it all of my life, and I just thought I wasn't crazy enough. And I'm still not quite that crazy, but it's letting go of anybody's any preconception, mine, anybody else's, and just letting it happen. And it's just been the most amazing thing for me to experience. And I've seen it in my students. I've seen one of my students was crying. She said, I never thought I could do this. And so we were both sitting there. I know, we were both sitting there crying. And it was just like, oh, because it brings out something in you that you don't necessarily know is there. And you're searching for it. It's hard to explain, but when it happens, you know it. You've probably been there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, do you think that point can that point come from the beginning, or do you think you kind of, because you said it wasn't, it was after you had been quilting for a bit and you didn't experience it while you're, is it the type of thing that you have to have a little bit of mastery first to be able to
Oh, you froze.
or to be able to get to that point where you're just fearless and break through and can just let it flow? Do you think you have to have a base level of mastery at the beginning, or do you think like it's a personal, like it's an internal job?
I think it's an internal job. I've had one student that never had quilted before,
Mm.
and she knew how to sew, but she hadn't really quilted, and she, it was amazing because she knew what she kind of wanted to make. She had this image, and which she had to let go of course, because I make them. But but it was. I don't know that you have to have any true level of expertise.
Okay.
You have to know how to work your sewing machine. I mean, I think that you have to know how to. Piecing can be challenging, but then piecing is also pretty straightforward, and so we do a lot of fancy piecing. And a lot of the struggles I do have are very interesting piecing problems. I call it engineering the quilt after it's designed, is trying to put it all together and make it make sense, because I've got a lot of curves and angles, and they're interesting to play with. And I know enough now that I can make them a little more complex, but I don't think you really have to have anything. I think a beginner could do it. The hardest thing is just to trust yourself and have faith that you can do it, and just jump in and try. I think that's the most exciting. It's no fear.
Yeah.
You can't hurt anybody. You can't hurt anything. You're just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're not surgeons in this way. We don't have to worry.
No.
We can just, the worst thing that happens is, we waste a little fabric.
We waste fabric. Yeah.
Which I don't think there's any waste in that. You learn something from the experience, and
every time I think you learn something. Yeah. And I do constantly learn.
Yeah.
Like joining your meander group was great, because you're bringing in all these new techniques that maybe I haven't tried yet. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. But even if I've tried them before, to sit and do them again and think through them again is very important. So for me at this point, it's all about staying engaged and learning everything I possibly can.
Yeah.
And so you can make an improv quilt without really a lot of experience. But I think for me, I need to keep learning things in order to keep it interesting for me.
Right.
I don't think that answered your question at all, but
no, it does. Yeah, and I feel the same way. I have to constantly be trying new things, to keep things interesting, and they can end up looking. It's funny because then I think once and maybe you can tell me if you've found this, when you're trying out different techniques maybe that are outside of improv or different things, do they end up kind of still looking like your style? Because I feel like my stuff ends up still, because I have I love like a collaged look. I love a silhouette. Like I have, I love this certain kind of palette. And so I find that almost anything that I make ends up looking like that, my fabric included. Have you found that to be true as well? Or
yeah, I think we can't get away from our style. We can't get away from our favorite colors. We can't get away from our favorite shapes.
Yeah.
I think we do see things in a certain way, and everybody sees things in their own way and loves their own kind of aesthetic that they've developed. I mean, you look at everything in your life that you absolutely fall in love with, looking through magazines or online, and they all have a similar qualities to them, and I think we can't help but make those.
Yeah.
But I think it's easier in some ways to make an improv quilt than it is to try to make a very precisely pieced, sewn together, regular, traditional quilt.
Yeah. I feel the same way. It's easier for me to do that, but I can assure you that lots of people that are listening are thinking,
Exactly.
No way.
But it's also a matter of, I mean, if I'm sewing squares together, I'm not engaged anymore. It's just like, it's busy work for me. And there is a lot of busy work in quilting.
Yeah.
But for me, I have to find a way to keep it interesting. And the entire process I do from start to finish is interesting to me, because I have to figure out then how to sew it together. Then I have to figure out how to quilt it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's great to get to the end where you're sitting on the couch and watching bad TV and binding it, in the evening. And then you're already thinking for the next one. What colors am I going to use tomorrow? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think everybody should try it
Mm-hmm.
once at least, just to see what comes out. Because it is very surprising to most people, I think, to see what it's,
Yeah.
following a pattern is somebody else's aesthetic, even though you can choose your own colors and
Mm-hmm.
and kind of arrangement and that kind of thing. But I think it's very telling, and it's a lot of fun just to see what comes out.
Yeah.
You don't have to, if you don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, I had like 3 questions pop up in my head at once. One question, do you think that anybody can do improv? Like, have you had any students where they were just like, they just weren't able to do it? Or is the type of thing that it's just kind of pushing through?
It's pushing through. I've had 2 students in particular that have science, math backgrounds.
Yeah.
Yes, and they're very much invested in their science and their math. And one of these persons was the one who was crying, because she did not think she had any creativity in her. She thought she was just so science oriented that she couldn't break through, and she did. And it was really cool. They they don't come into class with resistance, but they come in with some fear.
Yeah.
And so once we start working, the fear goes away, and the involvement in what they're doing, the engagement takes over. And so the process takes over, instead of the pre-thought that I can't do this because I'm not a creative person.
Mm.
It's like working a puzzle. I know when I start with jigsaw puzzles or with crosswords, at first I'm going, I'll never finish this.
Yeah.
And then you get all involved in trying to make sure you get it finished, and it happens.
Yeah.
And it's the same sort of thing, I think, for me.
Yeah. What do you think, or what do you find that your students struggle with the most, or where, when they hit that wall, what's the hardest thing for them, do you think? And then what do you suggest to kind of, for them to solve that problem or to kind of push through?
Well, I think they all hit the same wall that you and I both hit. It's everybody hits that wall at some point. It's just like, okay, this is all that's making sense to me. This part looks really good, and I don't know where to go next. That kind of wall.
Yeah.
That's when I say, put something up there.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what it is. Do you want to introduce a new color? Do you,
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times I'll just take strips that are sitting on the table, and I'll just put them up there and make them come off of one side or go up or whatever to open up the next space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's part of it, is opening up a space
Okay.
to react to, because you can get them, you get this tight little piece that looks really cool, and you're afraid to break it up because it looks great. You don't want to ruin it.
Yeah.
And so I think, that's one of the hardest things but that's what I do. I'll just go over and I'll just stick something on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'll ask them to stick something on the wall, and it opens up new ideas automatically. Yeah, it's really, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So they can get really insular, and then you just kind of say, all right, now let's go up left or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, and it's usually a scrap that's just sitting there, because there's a lot of scraps involved, with all of this, different shapes and different, just say, open up this space over here, throw something up there.
Yeah.
Put it out there, put it, 8 inches away, and then build something to meet it.
Okay. Yeah.
That works too. It's opening up and invigorating and a new part of the wall.
Okay. Yeah. When do you know that you're done?
That's a hard thing to know. I know when it's done because the space is filled. Okay, there's no more room up there. And with quilting, yeah, there's always a size that you're dealing with, and so that's one way to know. The other way is when you look at it and it just makes you really, really, really happy.
Yeah.
You can just look and go, okay, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
You know that, and people, it's a cliche, but it's true.
Mm-hmm.
That you can look at what you've done and it feels complete. It feels stable in a way. It relaxes you in a way.
Mm.
Yeah. It's hard. That's one of the hardest things. But I've noticed that my students don't have as much trouble with that as I thought they would.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's interesting. So you kind of feel it.
Mm-hmm.
You just go, I have nothing else to say for this one, and I'm ready to move on to another one, something like that.
Yeah.
And every piece of your wall is engaged and activated, in a way. Even if you're balancing a lot of little things up in one side with a really big open area in a different side, as long as it balances, you're done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that your painter, and I can't pronounce his name, that you originally drew inspiration from. What else are you inspired by, or where else do you find your inspiration, or maybe what's inspiring you right now?
I find inspiration everywhere. I mean, I just got back from a trip to New York,
mm-hmm.
and went to MoMA and went to the Met and Broadway, just walking down 42nd Street, the lights, the color, the pattern. I'm a very pattern and color person. A lot of fashion inspires me. Mm-hmm. At MoMA, there was a whole exhibition by an African artist who was making tiny utopian cities out of found objects like, boxes and tins, and a lot of color and a lot of pattern. Yeah. And that was just amazing to me. And I mean, I know a lot of painters. I took pictures of paintings in both the Met and MoMA. The Met had this amazing exhibition of fashion that was based on the Catholic Pope, whatever fashions. Oh. So there were mannequins in like these amazing gowns with religious iconography all over them. Mm-hmm. And then there was this row of mannequins all exactly alike, all dressed in black and white like they were nuns or priests. I mean, both of them were just exquisite. Yeah. I bought the catalog for that because I needed it at home. Mm. But just seeing how other people use color, and everything is exciting to me that's visual. That has a lot of color and a lot of pattern. I'm happy.
Yeah. So then how do you just kind of store in your brain the things that are exciting, or do you have a sketchbook? Do you just take pictures? How do you collect that information?
I do not ever sketch. Mm-hmm. I wish I did, but I've never been able to sketch. I have to work life size, and that's pretty much it, because I did a lot of figurative paintings for a long time, and if I do them small, they never look the same as they do when they're supposed to be big. Mm-hmm. And so I don't do that. I've had collected pictures, but I don't collect a lot of them. Mm-hmm. I've gotten so I'll find something on Instagram, and I'll go, oh, I really like those shapes. I really like those colors. And I, will put them on my desktop just to look at them. Yeah. But then I just let them soak in. And then when I'm in the studio, it all has to go away, because otherwise I don't want to copy. I just want to have that information and have it come out in any way it's going to come out.
I love that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why don't you tell us about anything that you have going on now? Any new projects that you're working on, or fun workshops?
I've started teaching this 2-day workshop, which is lots of fun at a local place here in town. And then the other thing I really love these days is fabric dyeing.
Oh, yes.
So I started with doing indigo with a good friend who taught me all about indigo and talked me into putting a vat in my kitchen, which I can do because I live alone, which is really nice.
Yeah.
So we made, natural organic indigo vats and have them in the kitchen, and we meet once a week, and we learned to do shibori, which is the folding and the manipulating the fabric to make patterns in indigo, and really got into indigo. And we're teaching classes in that. And of course that led to, well, these are all blue, so I need to make some different colors. So I ordered some fiber reactive dyes, which are chemical dyes, right? And so I started doing low immersion water Procyon dyeing to come up with all these. And that's been amazing because as a painter, I thought I knew how to mix colors, but dyes react and respond completely differently than paints do.
Yeah.
So, which I learned the hard way. Reds take over everything. So I started playing with those, and what comes after that then is all these other natural dyes. So now, yesterday we did onion skin dyeing and came out with some really beautiful golds.
Cool.
We've done, we do a lot of avocado pit dyeing just because that's a color that is very interesting to me, that kind of funny, pinky, fleshy color. And I just ordered some different lac and logwood, which are purples, and some cochineal bugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm really playing, and I find that the depth of these fabrics they're much richer and more interesting to me than commercially dyed yardage, because they have subtleties to them in tones and colors and that you don't get in a commercial. So this year what I'm really trying to do is only use, 90% of the fabrics that I'm using in my quilts have to be dyed by me.
Cool.
Yeah. And so they're softer. They have this funny, different kind of softness to them, which is nice too, because that's a challenge for me, is to use, less bright fabric. So I'm really working hard on that.
Yeah. Lovely. Because another thing that I know a lot of people struggle with is choosing their colors, choosing their fabrics. How do you approach that?
I'm usually in a mood. And I'll go in and I'll look to see what's there. And I go, ooh, I love this magenta today. And so I'll pull it out. And then I'll go, well, what goes with this? And I'll start trying things. I mean, there are times I will have, never 50 because I don't have that many fabrics. I don't have a huge stash, which makes it easier too.
Sure.
But I will have maybe 10 pieces of fabric, different colors on the wall, and see how they interact. And that's important with color, because, color changes depending on what it's next to.
Yeah.
And I clear the design board off completely because I don't want any, peripheral color either. Like if I have blue tape, I take it down because the blue tape, affects the colors that you put next to it. So I will start putting things and just trying them, but I stick to that original color, and I'll make things that go with it. And try to keep it to about 5 to 6 colors at the most to start with.
Yeah.
I mean, I throw in pops of color all the time because those are important, because they pop your eye around the quilt, around the surface, and it's fun to do that. But I don't like to use a whole bunch of colors anymore at one time.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing a series of quilts I'm calling dances, from the whole dance thing. And I'm trying to get as much movement as I possibly can into a quilt. So I'm really working with curved piecing and what creates movement, whether it's, striped fabric that you just follow with your eye along. And then it goes into a curve, and then so it whirls. And I've been looking at a lot of images of people dancing and watching them twirl and that kind of thing to see how to do that. And so these days, a lot of the colors I'm choosing have to do with the dances I'm playing with. Because I just finished, what I call the flamenco, and it's reds and blacks and in whites because it's, it's a flamingo.
Yeah.
And so it's really, that's what I'm doing right now. And that's what's really keeping me going right now is these dances.
Lovely. Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. Well, I could just sit here and talk to you about color and creativity and quilting all day long.
Yeah, we could talk about color all day.
Right? Yeah, this has been amazing, and I know that that my audience is just gonna love this and find so much value from it, and just be totally inspired by you. You're amazing.
Well, I just want people to know that they just really need to get out of their own way. Just try it. Just it makes you really happy. When you see it happen, it's really an exhilarating feeling. And I think I wish that for everybody, that they can find that feeling, and you can. You just have to, no fear, get out of your way, let it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is great advice for quilting and for anything, right?
Well, pretty much anything. Yeah, I have to walk 8 miles in the morning, and I'm not sure I can walk 8 miles anymore. I'm going, well, okay, I need to get out of my way. Of course I can walk 8 miles. This is no problem.
There you go.
Yep.
So how can people find out more about you, or if they want you to come teach at their guild, how can they reach out to you?
I have a website. It's just ireneroderick.com. It's not a wonderful website, but it's there. It has paintings, it has sculpture, it has quilts on it, and then it has a contact page. And so it's just my email address, and anybody can contact me by that email address at any time.
Perfect. Yeah, because I'm sure lots of people are thinking, ooh, I want her to come to my guild and teach us how to dance with our boards.
Okay, that sounds like fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to chat with me. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting.
Yeah. All right, Irene. Well, I'll see you around town because we're both here in Austin. And you have a great rest of your day.
You too? Okay.